All right, here's the next lesson for ancient Greece. So in the last lesson we were talking about Sparta, and basically how it's made up, how the way the government works, kind of the way they run their society, very militaristic, and how they really are like one end of the spectrum as far as like the way the Greeks set up city-states. Well, the opposite end of the spectrum would be Athens. So Athens, if you notice at the top here, it says limited democracy. Yes, this is where we get the idea of democracy from. And in this lesson, I'm going to be going through just the path to how they came up with democracy. It wasn't just something where they decided one day, oh, this would be nice. Let's try it. It was a step process in how they got to it. And how do I put this? It's not like oh, this was a great thing to happen to lead to democracy. Or this was a great thing to happen to lead to democracy. Some things you could say were maybe like that, and definitely we were going to go through some things that basically terms are like, oh, I've heard of that before because I live in that type of society. We have that. We say that's a good thing. And I'm going to go over where we get those things from in, say, our modern style democracy or Western style democracies today. So, anyways, but again, just to reiterate, Athens and Sparta are just polar opposites on Greek city-states in general. Like Athens is very, very different from Sparta. So that being said, I want to show a map really quick. This is actually a map of a war that takes place between Athens and Sparta later on that we'll talk about, the Peloponnesian War. But I just want to point out, well, first off, I want to point out where Athens is. I don't know if I've pointed this out much in the video lessons, but Athens right there on the peninsula of Attica on mainland Greece, whereas Sparta is down here. You have some of the other major city-states like Corinth and Thebes. Will be big players that we talk about later on in other stories as we go through the history of ancient Greece, especially when we get into the war stuff. But just if you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, there's all the orange is Athens and all the purple is Sparta, I just need to point out that that isn't like all of Athenian territory. This isn't all Spartan territory. That's just all the different Greek city-states that agree with one or the other, that agree with Athens, that agree with Sparta. And I can't even go as far as saying they agree with them. That's actually not the case. In most cases, you're on a side mostly because you don't like the other side. Like you choose to be on one side because you hate the other side more. Again, you have that very rivalistic culture amongst the ancient Greeks. Anyways, just wanted to point that out. So, but getting into Athens. First off, we need to talk about the word constitution. We say that all the time. That is not constitutional. So what does the word constitution mean? Well, it's a word we get from ancient Athens that means plan of government. Definitely need to get that down. Hint, hint, most likely on the quiz. So, which means that when we say things like, from an American perspective, in the United States, we say, that's not constitutional, we were referring to our own written plan of government, the American Constitution. A lot of countries now have constitutions, written plans of government, that in a lot of cases are very different from ours. But whether it's the United States we're talking about or a different country that has a constitution in place, we all look back to Athens as the one that just gives us idea that, okay, we need a foundation. We need to write out how our government is going to work. We can have a written document to look to say, this is how it works. We need to stay within the bounds. So, although that also doesn't mean that constitutions are perfect in any way, shape, or form, we definitely like to tout the American Constitution as one of the best, if not the best one ever. Might be coming a bit from a biased perspective since I'm an American myself, but we definitely believe that. We're going to be talking about a few things when we get to the actual Constitution of Athens where there's some problems. I'll just put it that way. Some great things about it, definitely some problems with it. So, the next term that, well, at the top it says limited democracy. Well, what is a limited democracy versus a pure democracy? That depends on who you ask. And when I say depends on who you ask, depends on who you ask and what time period you ask them. Are we actually asking someone from ancient Athens from 2,500 years ago? Or are we asking someone from, say, modern day United States and modern day France today? It differs. So let me just put it this way. If you're going to ask someone from ancient Athens what a democracy is, or difference between pure democracy and limited democracy, they're going to say, well, we came up with the term, so we have pure democracy. We're the ones that do it the right way because we're the ones that invented it. But if you ask someone from, say, the United States or France or Great Britain or basically many different Western democracies today, Germany, Sweden, whatnot, then we would like to say things like, well, no, Athens, they might have come up with the term democracy, power of the people, but they weren't a real democracy because they only let men who were born in Athens vote, and women didn't even vote, any new move-ins didn't get a vote. Whereas in modern Western democracies today, again, like mostly you see in Europe and the Americas, well, everybody gets to vote, especially women get to vote. Even new move-ins get to vote over time, again, depending on the Constitution, what it says on citizenship rules. So just need to point that out, that these are two very big things we get from Athens. Just the concept of democracy in the first place, whether we want to call it limited or not, that's just, again, that's our view looking back on them. And we definitely get the word constitution from them. So, now, how do we get there? It comes through influential tyrants. And just, I'm going to be going over 4 of these, and a couple of them I'm going to be talking a lot about. They're very influential in our society today. We have a lot of words that come off of them. You'll probably recognize this first one, Draco. If your first thought process went to like Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, well, yes, she actually gets the name from him. And the more I talk about him, it might make a little bit more sense. Not completely, but it might make a little more sense. Then we're going to talk about another guy named Solon. Then a guy named Pisistratus. Then Cleisthenes. Now notice at the top it says they are tyrants. Again, we talked about this, 2 lessons ago, where we view the term tyrant as that's a bad person. But to the ancient Greeks, a lot of times it was someone who was needed. You needed someone to come in and fix everything. Again, just to reiterate today, the reason why we have a negative connotation on tyrants is as we look at history, more often than not, giving one person that much power, all power to do everything, in the long term goes bad. Short term might be good, but in the long term goes bad. And in fact, we look at these tyrants, especially these 4 I'm going to go through right now. When I say we, like the founders of the United States, and then onwards, like you're taking this class right now to say, okay, what happens when you get a guy like Pisistratus in power? How do you deal with someone like that? Because he's not a good guy, let's put it that way. So I'll get into that story in a second. But they are tyrants, but it was like, this is the ironic thing. Through tyrants, we get democracy. Sounds odd, but we're going to go through this. So first off, we are going to talk about Draco. So in talking about Draco, I need to build up basically what is going on in the city of Athens at the time. So if you remember the word aristocracy, Athens is basically run by an aristocracy, a group of the best people who know what's best for the city, and they have a lot of power. And yeah, it's basically kind of like the elite upper class is controlling everyone else in the city. How do I put this? It's not like things were going really bad in the beginning with this, and in fact it might have worked out well, but the problem is again, the whole concept of absolute power corrupts absolutely, and when people get used to being top with all the power, well, here's the problem that comes into play. The younger generations, especially the aristocratic younger generation, grows up basically like a bunch of spoiled brats. And daddy is always covering for them. To put it frankly, they start forming gangs. They start doing stuff like vandalizing different areas of the city. They start getting into fights. You start seeing a lot of people getting beat up, a lot of gang violence. And most of the time, it was an aristocratic son who was leading one of these gangs, going around terrorizing the citizens of Athens. And they never got in trouble because aristocratic dad would always just kind of sweep it under the rug. And again, there's so many stories we can go into here. It's actually, the Greeks have this written out quite well, and how this goes and just how bad things were in specific stories. I'm just trying to summarize what's going on in terms that I hope you guys understand. Basically, gangs of kids led by aristocrats going around. Now notice how I said gangs of kids led by aristocrats. Not all these kids are aristocrats. In fact, most of them aren't. Because you realize, hey, if I want to do what I want to do and not necessarily get in trouble for it, I'm going to hang out with that guy whose dad's always going to save him and hopefully me as well, just to do whatever I want. So just bad things are happening. And everybody's getting pretty ticked off where they just want someone to come in and just fix the situation. Like it's getting so bad that everybody knows it just needs to just be done. Now, I keep talking about the aristocrats letting this happen. It's not like all aristocrats let this happen. You do have ones that are trying to keep control, and they're probably more pissed off than anybody else. But in comes Draco. Now Draco is actually asked by the city to say, you need to solve this problem. We got too many of these gangs running around, these young men running around just terrorizing the city. You have command of the military, basically the police. Fix this. He's like, all right, I will. Now, just note, Draco is an aristocrat himself. Just apparently not one of the more, how would you put it, corrupt ones. But he does become known for coming up with incredibly strict laws. Now, we had talked about China before this, and the guys like Qin Shi Huangdi, and being very legalistic. Draco falls right in line with a character like Qin Shi Huangdi from China, if you remember talking about him. He's like, all right, I'm going to come out with incredibly strict laws with very harsh punishments, most of the time death, like you'll just be killed for anything. But I'm going to make sure that I write it down, kind of like Code of Hammurabi. I'm going to write it down and make sure that everybody knows what the laws are so no one can complain when we execute you for breaking the law. And most of these laws were targeted mostly at this younger generation, at the young kids that were just way out of control. But because of this whole strict law, and I'll give you some examples here in a second, because of these strict laws, we have the term draconian today based off of Draco. Whenever we think a rule or from anyone, like from our government, from our parents, from our teachers, just anybody in authority, if we think their laws are just overly strict, not just a little bit strict, but overly strict, we call it draconian, because during Draco's reign as tyrant of Athens, he was, very draconian, incredibly strict and harsh. So, to put it bluntly, you even had laws against things like idleness. You cannot be idle or you'll be put to death, meaning like if you're just this young man out on the street just kind of lounging around, you could be put to death immediately. Like in a lot of cases, not even a trial given, if I understand. At least I believe that was the idea, where like you could be tried on the spot and executed on the spot. In situations like that, the reason why they even had a law against things like idleness is like whenever young men were just doing nothing on the side of the street, it was usually understood that they were up to no good, so stop them before they can do anything bad. Again, sounds very legalistic, does it not? But of course, things like just simple theft, vandalism, things like that, the punishment for everything was death. And yes, Draco got Athens really in line, and I mean really in line. But then you'd have to ask the question, well, was everybody in line because they wanted to be? They're like, this is great, we love these strict laws? Or does everybody get in line because they were just completely afraid of, I'm going to die. If I do anything bad, I'm going to die. There really isn't much of a middle ground there. So, but that's Draco. And just to kind of put it simply, he fixes Athens. But did Athens like the way it was fixed? Well, we kind of find that out a little bit after he passes away. Like once he passes away, they actually keep a lot of the rules on the books. They actually like the rules he came up with, like against idleness and things like that. But they reduced the punishments. And all of a sudden, Athens was great. After Draco went bye-bye, and they reduced the punishments on from death, because death was the punishment. They reduced that to, I don't know how to say, I can't really say normal punishments, but less harsh punishments. People were very happy, and actually Athens was a great place overall at that point. It was like, okay, we can follow these rules, the punishments aren't as bad, we feel better, and they just move on from there. But that brings us into the next major problem that arises in ancient Athens, and that is the reason for why a guy named Solon is now made tyrant. And that has everything to do with debt slavery. Now, to understand this, we need to talk about slavery that is more of the normal slavery in not just ancient Greece, but throughout most of the ancient world. Again, I told you last time that there's two ways usually you get slaves: prisoners of war and debt slavery. Sparta is way outside the norm when they have their helot-style slaveries, where they're just your property type of slaves forever, and you will never have the chance for freedom, that type of thing. Usually debt slaves, well, they have the chance for freedom, pay off your debt. But in becoming a debt slave, well, it's one thing to say, I'm going to put myself into slavery to someone in the idea of like, I would like to make money. We'd call that actually indentured servitude in a way. Debt slavery is a lot like that. But in ancient Athens and a lot of ancient places, even ancient Rome would do this, you can sell your kids into slavery. So, like, all right, we need some money. All right, Johnny, I'm going to sell you off. I made a contract with the aristocratic family up the street. You're going to do all the stuff for them, all these chores and things like that, and I'm going to pocket the money as your dad, not you. You're going to do the work. In today's thinking, like, I'm definitely speaking from a bit of a biased position today, and just like all this would be considered really bad, but it doesn't seem fair. If your son's doing the work, why isn't he getting paid? But the parents will get paid. So there was a huge incentive to keep selling your kids, and actually becomes like a way of life, like a job. All right, we need some more money. Let's have another kid. And if just think about this in your mind, this gets way out of hand pretty quickly within Athens, because you realize, well, let's just keep selling kids. Problem is that even when you have a lot of, I forgot to mention this. This was actually viewed as a win-win. That's going to sound really bad. It sounds like a win-win because, one, the family gets the money for selling their kids, and it's a way of life, keeping up with life and paying the bills and stuff like that, or maybe having a little bit better in life than just paying the bills. But the kids actually was seen as a win-win for them, because if they're coming from a poor family, you don't have as many opportunities. But if you can go live with that aristocratic family and be the slave for, say, 7 years or so, then you're also, like, part of the deal was usually always to educate that kid. In fact, once he stopped being a slave, he or she most likely would have a better chance later in life, more opportunity because of that education. So that's how it was viewed as a win-win in many ways. But you get to this problem where, like, you get so many families selling kids off that there isn't enough aristocratic money out there to buy them all up. There's, like, not enough space in their houses. Like, they're just... So what do? These families that just kind of living off of their own kids will sell them to other city-states, over to Thebes and Megara and things like that. I don't know how many they were able to sell over there, but that would happen. But even, that becomes not as much available. They just have so many kids available for sale. This sounds so bad. So then you go to the worst of the worst. You then go to the Persian Empire, who I have not talked about yet, and we're going to talk about a lot soon. But the Persian Empire, and if you sell your kid in the Persian Empire, it's kind of like it's not like the normal debt slavery where you kind of get a monthly income saying, okay, I'll pay you this much per month while I have your kid. For the Persian Empire, it's like, all right, $5,000 for my kid and I'll never see him again? Done. That's where we're getting to like the type of slavery that are like, okay, that's absolutely not right. Like, you're selling your kid knowing you're never going to see him again just so you can get that big paycheck, Like, that's just not right. And so Athens actually starts seeing a lot of their population leave. This is a bad deal. It's like, we don't want to see our population leave. Are we going to be a city in 20 years if all our kids keep getting sold out? So because they see this problem, Solon is invited in. So when Solon comes in, he's asked to fix the situation. And the way he fixes it, well, even though he was asked by the aristocrats to fix the situation, he kind of ticks them off. So, I don't explain it here, but what he does is he's like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We need to buy all those kids back. These were honest transactions. We can't just take them back. We need to live up to these promises that we made type thing. So, I'm going to raise taxes immensely on, The first thing he does, he says, I'm canceling all slaves in Athens immediately, meaning all kids that are in these aristocratic houses, you go back to your parents' house. I wonder how that happened if you were selling so many kids and you did not have a big house to deal with them. But you have to go back to your parents. Aristocrats, you stop paying for those kids, kind of put a pause on all that. And then all that money that you were paying for those kids right there, well, I'm going to tax that from you. I'm going to raise taxes on you, and then I'm going to take that money, and I'm going to go to Thebes, and I'm going to go to Megara, and I'm going to send people even out to the Persian Empire and buy back as many kids as we can. He doesn't get all of them, but he gets a lot of them. Now, if you can imagine, he pisses everybody off with this. Aristocrats are ticked off about the taxes. The lower class people are ticked off that they're not getting their income, and all of a sudden their households are just massive. But he has enough support apparently, and definitely has the military behind him, where he's like, this is the way it is. You made me tyrant, I'm fixing the situation. This is how we're fixing the situation. And even though people were really pissed off in the beginning, over time they came to say, this was amazing. In the short term, this really sucked, but in the long term, this is awesome, because Well, he sets up a competition. He doesn't get rid of slavery altogether. He put a stop to it temporarily and then canceled it. Then he says, all right, we're reinstituting debt slavery in the idea of you can only sell kids to Athenian families. Only Athenian families can buy other debt slave from other families, and that's it. So once he made it so that no one could sell kids outside of Athens, competition entered in. All of a sudden, aristocratic families would have this large choice of like, well, I'd like that kid back and that kid, but I didn't like him very much. I wish I wouldn't have paid him in the first place, and now I'm not going to. And so this also made it so that families wouldn't just have massive amount of kids just to throw off on society. Because in a way you're kind of, I shouldn't say punishing yourself by having kids, but that's the viewpoint here. That if you got like 15 kids now and you can't, and aristocrats aren't willing to buy them up, then you got to deal with them. You got to find another way to make it in life in Athens and pay the bills. You're gonna have to find something, innovate in some way, be an entrepreneur in some way, start a family business somehow. Like basically, that's what happens. Again, not everybody's happy about this, but long term it works incredibly well. So well, in fact, that where Solon is viewed as the great savior of Athens. He's looked at by everybody back then, everybody today, all over the world, not just Westerners, but this guy's talked about in places like China. As like, yeah, he did a good job. He knows what he's doing. So basically, almost in a universal fashion, Solon is viewed as one of these great leaders that was willing to do what was needed, even though he pissed everybody off, but it came out well. Now, because he gets this reputation for just being a great leader, everybody comes to him with their problems, and this starts up the next thing we need to talk about with Solon is he's the guy that establishes trial by jury. So trial by jury, I hope you guys understand what trial by jury is. Trial by your peers, people in the community around you, judge whether or not you're guilty or innocent on something, and you can get hopefully a fair thing off of that. So, but with trial by jury,
Rodney Sager, please call extension 735-756.
I can't control that. So, with trial by jury, what happened is people kept coming to him saying, well, I'm really mad at this guy, and you need to decide what's right or wrong in this case. And just so many people kept coming to him with problems. He got sick of it. He got tired of it. He's like, stop coming with your stuff. I don't want to deal with it anymore. So he's like, tell you what, I'm going to set up a council over here, group of people. These are your neighbors. They'll decide if you're right or wrong. And this did a lot of things. One, he did it out of, like, you could argue on the very negative side, negative way of looking at him, saying he did this because he was just wanting to be lazy at the end of his life, didn't want to really do his duty. But by delegating this out to the communities, this did two things. One, it made his life easier, but then it also kept a lot of these problems more local, where really people realized, my problems are going to be solved by my neighbors. I better be pretty neighborly, and when the crap hits the fan, if something goes down, I hope my neighbors will look at me and judge me fairly because they know me, which then, kind of gets people to just not think that they can just jack their neighbor because they can go to Solon or get someone from outside to come down and give down some sort of punishment. So that worked well. We love that idea in modern Western democracies, especially in the United States, this concept of trial by jury. Yes, there's definitely things you can argue against it, but it's held up as one of the great pillars of a free society, especially American society. Now, the last thing on there, where he says he establishes a council of 400 men to draft laws that he would then ratify. Well, think about that. That sounds a lot like our Congress and the President of the United States, the executive and legislative branches, and how they work. We definitely see some beginnings of that thought process there. But this also goes to the idea of he didn't want to make all the decisions. He was getting tired of it. And so he's like, hey, let's just have a group come up with this, and if I like it, it goes. And basically, there's more I could go into Solomon, but that's the big stuff. I'm hoping you're seeing a lot of connections between what he does and our society today. So with that, I'm actually going to end this video right now and just call it part 1 of Athens, as we do have a lot to talk about later on, and I'm just worried about this video going too long. We've already gone about 25 minutes. So I will see you in the next lesson.